Hello and welcome back to the Book, Business, and Brand Building Summit. I'm your host, Jesse Krieger, and today I'm very excited to be joined by my good friend, fellow author, Daniel Munro. Dan, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing really good, man. It's awesome to be here, and I'm really keen to support what you're doing here. I think it's fantastic work.
Cheers. Yeah, well, I'll give a little bit of context. On this summit, it's all about how to leverage your book to build a thriving business and brand. And so whether you're a first-time author, an aspiring author, or a multi-time author, the emphasis on this summit is looking beyond just the book and actually thinking of a book as your best business development tool. And if you're a business owner, an entrepreneur, and considering writing a book, hopefully you'll get enough information throughout the course of this summit to determine if it is in fact the right move for you. Spoiler alert, it probably is, because a book ends up being one of the best ways to put your knowledge, your experience, your accumulated wisdom into a tangible form and reach a large audience. And that is the overarching theme of what we're going to be covering on all of the interviews on this summit. So that being said, give a little bit of an introduction for Dan Munro. I'll let him tell his side of the story too, but, I'm exceptionally excited to have Dan because, when I wrote my book, Lifestyle Entrepreneur, and it came out back in 2012 and 13 initially, I didn't know what the impact would be from the book reaching readers all around the world. And Dan's an exceptional case in the sense that he somehow found a copy of my book. He lives in New Zealand and ultimately credits that with having him change his career path, quitting his job, starting his own company. And ultimately he wrote to me as I put an invitation in the introduction of my book, encouraging anybody to reach out and say, what did you learn? What knowledge, what applications have you, put into play in your own life from reading this book? And so Dan reached out and told me what it inspired him to do and the action he took. And I'm very pleased that that led to ultimately, as I moved into my role as a publisher, being able to publish Dan's book, The Legendary Life, and now have a great working and personal relationship. And I think it just speaks to the power of a book to both impact somebody's life and to create new connections, relationships, even a half a world away. That really, I can't think of a better way to establish a relationship of similar like-mindedness and values and an approach to life and business. So with that, I give you Dan Munro. And Dan, why don't you just, introduce yourself and share a little bit about your story that led you, not just from finding my book, but ultimately that led you to deciding to write your book and what that experience was like. And we can jump off from there.
Yeah, I think, for me, the whole book writing transition, the whole experience of writing the book was the major turning point in my career and in my life, really. Me discovering what my mission in life is and starting to live by that all started with the book. And what happened, I was about late 2012, I read your book. I can't actually remember how I came across it. It would have been, who knows. But I found it and I read it. And at that time, I was starting to get a bit of real dissatisfaction with the job I was in. It was a cool job. I was working as a probation officer, and it had a lot of fun times, but I just wasn't quite there. I felt this kind of unfulfilled thing happening. And when I read your book, it gave me the sense of hope, I guess, or certainty that actually I didn't have to follow all the rules and work the same kind of job and live the same kind of life that everyone else did. I could start my own thing. I could create something that never been done before. So after I read your book, I got super inspired and hyped up. And I remember I had a 2-week holiday, 3-week holiday at the beginning of 2013, and I spent the entire time writing a book, which I'd never done before. I'd dabbled in some writing before, but never any sort of book writing. But essentially, I'd been through, before that point in time, I'd been through a massive self-development journey and discovered all these really helpful things, and I wanted to share those with other people. That's what your book inspired me to do, is to try and get my message out there, to try and have an impact on people. And writing a book was the first idea I had as to how to do that. So I wrote a self-development book, and I had no idea what I was going to do with it. Mostly I was writing it for myself. I just wanted to get my own ideas down. And I was kind of hoping that one day I might be able to impact other people with that. So in those 3 weeks, I wrote an awful first draft, and started breaching through, I guess, the fear to share it with other people, to get feedback on it, to have my friends and family edit it and give me feedback. And the rest kind of branched out from there. But that was really interesting. That's what I like about our sort of, it's been years now, essentially, our ongoing connection. It all started with a book, and it continues to be about writing and about books.
Absolutely. I mean, maybe you can share a little bit about, as you were writing on that vacation, what was it that you really wanted to get down on paper? And I can relate when you said that, you wrote it primarily for yourself. That was largely my experience too. For those of you that know my story, as I pushed through the sale of a previous company, amidst many, a lot of hardship, when it was all said and done, I realized, there's never going to be a time when I know as clearly as I do right now, the front to back process from having an idea to building a location independent business and scaling it up to 5 figures a month in revenue. And I just wanted to get that down before I got involved in something else and the memory began to get clouded or fade. So, what was it for you that you really wanted to get across when you sat down and spent that chunk of time writing the first manuscript, first draft for your book?
Well, that just prompted to remind me, actually, one of the reasons I was reading your book is because like I said before, I'd been on a self-development journey, and what I discovered was a system for building confidence. I've obviously adapted it a lot since then, but for the first time in my life at that end, that end of 2012, I felt like I'd finally figured out the basic building blocks for creating self-confidence, for being okay with being yourself. And that was the first time in my entire life I'd felt that way. And that's what kind of excited me, is like, not only have I achieved this for myself, I kind of know how I did it. I know how that could be applied to others. I know it's just processes and tools and techniques that anybody else could use. It's nothing special about me. And that's what I wanted to use the writing process, was to clarify that. I wanted to be able to see if I could take the whole journey I've been on, remove all the stuff that didn't work and keep the stuff that did, and come up with a system that somebody else, without needing me there, would be able to use it, and the same effect would happen. They would build their self-worth, and they'd come to really enjoy being who they were. And so that's, I think, if anything, it was like a sense of obligation. I've discovered something special, and it's my duty to share it with other people. It would be selfish not to. And I think, when I think about writing, especially a nonfiction type book, if it's based on the idea you feel compelled to share a message, to share a secret that you've discovered with others, because if you don't, they could be significantly missing out. I mean, I can't think of a better reason to write a book.
I love that. I really like that. And I think that's maybe the first takeaway in this interview, is like, and I can relate. And actually one of my mentors and initial heroes in this space, Brendan Burchard, even said the same thing, is like writing and doing business driven by a sense of obligation, that, you have something and it's valuable and you feel compelled to share it. I think that's a very clean and healthy motivation to write a book, as well as to start, coaching or working with other people from sort of an inspirational and instructional standpoint. And it's in line with, my own experience, where, I had just built a business from idea to $500,000 in revenue in 12 months, and largely was traveling all around the world. And people I knew and people I just met were like, how do you do this? How did you structure this? And it wasn't the first time I had done something like that. So when it all was said and done, I felt like, I almost feel compelled. I feel obligated to share, what is it that I'm thinking about? What is the process I'm going through? And it sounds like that's something that you experienced as well. And, just for fun, maybe you can share one or two takeaways or practical applications that you discovered or ultimately wrote about to help people embody more of their own self-confidence and feel more empowered in their life?
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, the book was essentially based around two key concepts. One was kind of goal setting and planning, and the other was around self-motivation. Now, I have developed my ideas a lot since then. I know we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think one of the key things was actually, it's a process that I now call quantum parts. I don't call it that in the book, but it's where you take something big and overwhelming and you break it down into smaller pieces, and you keep doing that until you're left with pieces that you can handle the size of. And it sounds like a very simplistic process, but very few people do it. So somebody will have a goal, or they'll call it a goal. They'll say, I want to start a business. And they're intimidated by the sheer size and uncertainty of that goal. You know, starting a business sounds like this massive thing. But actually, starting a business is a series of tiny actions, one after the other. And so if you start with this big thing, start a business, and then you ask yourself, well, what are all the different pieces of that? What are all the chunks? And you break it down into chunks. First, I need to learn marketing. Then I need to learn this. Then I need to do that. I need to figure out how to engage with clients. I need to figure out who my clients are, and so on. And you're breaking all these steps into different bits and pieces. And as you've done that, you know, I like to use these like sticky note, what do you call them, Post-it notes. You can actually take them and you rearrange them so that you put them in a chronological order. Like, before this can happen, this needs to happen. And before that can happen, this needs to happen. And you get them all into this kind of linear process where that big goal that scared you, you can actually see it's a path of steps that you need to take. And then once you're down a step that's the closest one to you, you break that into your goals. That's where you actually take your action. So your first step might be Google how to start a business. You know, because you haven't even started even conceptualizing what people do to start a business. And until that step's taken, none of the other ones even matter. And it's a huge motivational process that you can go to, because it takes that thing that seems too big to handle and takes it down to a step, an action you can take that you totally can handle. And you know that that action is the right action to take right now. So that was one of the key aspects of the book. Obviously, it's chapters and chapters that go through that. But the reason I bring up that example is because it's also a great way to write a book. You've got write a book as a goal, and that's very intimidating. I know that that's intimidating. It seems too much because it comes with so much obligation and pressure and just 1,000 things you don't know yet. But if you take it down to the point where you come up with the title of the book as your first action, you can handle that action. You know, or write the first line, or draft a set of that might be in the book. Whatever it is that your first action is, it takes that big thing of write a book that's totally terrifying and takes it down to like 15 minutes of work that you can do right now.
I love that. Small chunking a big goal down into manageable, discrete steps. And I think there's, you know, one of the best, there's a trainer for Olympic athletes who once said this advice, and I don't know the name, so forgive me if I'm not citing the right source, but he said, you know, if you want somebody to commit to breaking an Olympic record, you don't set that as the goal or the commitment that they're going to make. You set the commitment that every day they sit down and put on their left shoe. Mm-hmm. Because what happens, as he described it, is, you know, if you are committed to taking the small step of sitting down, putting on a sock and tying your left shoe, then what comes next? Well, then you put on your right shoe. And then what comes next? You get up and you walk out the door. And then what comes next? And as long as you're committed to taking that first small discrete step, you build the momentum and you shift yourself into the mindset where you cross the threshold of inaction to action. And that's so important. I mean, I'm interested to hear if you have a different reflection or experience on small chunking, but I loved that as a commitment instead of overwhelming yourself by saying, like, I'm going to reach out to 10 influencers and ask their number one piece of advice on how to start a business. Just say, you know, I'm going to spend 15 minutes dedicated to investigating the process to start a business or write a book. And once you're in it, you lose, I mean, ideally you get to a point where you lose track of time and you're just in the flow, and the rest of it starts to take care of itself.
Yeah, I mean, I've used that exact example you gave with clients. Say somebody wants to go to the gym. I'm like, forget going to the gym. Put your gym shoes on. That's all you're obliged to do. Whatever happens after that, that's a different choice. Until those shoes are on, nothing else matters. And everybody's got that kind of tipping point. It's a point in the process that they can handle, but also once they've done it, the rest will happen. You know, even like I've got to approach 10 influencers that seem so intimidating. The smallest step is that I'll pick up my phone. Until I've picked up my phone, nothing else matters. So I pick up my phone. Okay, what's next after picking up my phone? Dialing in the number. All right, until that's done, nothing else matters. I dial in the number. Right, okay, the number's dialed. Now what? Hit send. It breaks this thing that's so intimidating down into its tiny, like if you think of the whole thing being a loaf of bread, what are the crumbs? What's the first crumb? What's the second crumb? And you don't need to do this all the time. It's just to wind up that momentum, get things moving. And once they move, like you say, you just get lost in the flow of it. But that's the kind of my biggest understanding of how to break something that's intimidating down into me actually doing stuff is really what's the smallest part of it. And until I've done that smallest part, nothing else matters.
That's good stuff. Yeah. So hopefully for those of you watching and listening to this, small chunk your big goals down into manageable, even very small, discrete steps, and just commit to taking the first one. Because once you do, then the rest of the steps, almost become inconsequential in the sense that, once you cross that threshold of inaction to action, you build momentum. And, I've used this analogy in other contexts, but like if you imagine a freight train, a big, long train that weighs hundreds of tons, maybe more, and to start moving, it takes so much energy, right? So it's steam's coming out, it's pulling its horn, it's starting to move. If you just lay a single brick on the track when it's just starting to move, you could stop an entire train that weighs hundreds of tons. But once it starts to move and it starts to build momentum, and now it's going 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, that train could literally smash through a brick wall and not skip a beat. And that's the power of building momentum and inertia. And it also speaks to how little it actually takes to stop a good idea in its tracks, to kill something that could be a huge inspiration to others before it's even started. And I think that's relevant here. And so, I mean, that's really good stuff, Dan. I'm curious to hear now how you wrote The Legendary Life. And at first you wrote it and did an attempt at self-publishing. And I think that was before we began to work together. So what was that experience like, trying to do it all yourself versus the experience of working with a publisher, and ultimately how that resulted in getting the book as we all know it out into the world in its current form?
Yeah, that's definitely a good learning experience for myself. So when I first wrote the book, I called it something else. I think it was called Driven. And I used a lot of the things in your lifestyle entrepreneur book in terms of using, what's it called now? It used to, that online freelance, it was elance.com.
Rest in peace, Elance.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I followed the process of hiring people on that to do different parts, like to design my cover and to edit. I think I got them to help edit and get it all ready for Kindle. I went through all of that myself, and I really skimped on investing. So I found the cheapest people to do the cheapest job, and I got the cheapest result as part of that. So I had a finished product for Kindle. It was just Kindle. There was no create space or physical copy. It's just Kindle. And I didn't know what I was doing, but by that stage I'd had a bunch of people read it, my friends and family, and give me their feedback and edit it. And looking back, I started the best way I knew how. At least I gave it a fair go, and that's what led me to where I am now. So I definitely am glad that I went through this. But I'd say in that first year, I think it was about 6 to 8 months before I contacted you. I can't really remember, but that period of time, I sold maybe 20 copies in total on Amazon. I had no idea how to market anything. I just kind of thought you put something on Amazon and then you sit back and drown in money, but it didn't quite work out that way. Now, what was happening is at first I was doubting the quality of the book because of those sales, but by this stage I was now coaching people using a lot of what was in the book and seeing that this definitely benefited people, that the people who did read my book got a lot out of it and so on. And so I don't know if I at that time I remember I'd done some research into like what do you call them, like the big five publishers, those big publishing companies. I found out you had to get a publishing agent, and that in alone was a mission. Like, good luck trying to get published. Just try to get a publishing agent. It's hard. And I was getting a lot of rejections in that space. I was trying to approach all these people. Most of them just didn't get back to me. And I reached out to you quite genuinely. I was just, I was starting to coach people now. I was enjoying it, and I realized, that it all started when I read the book. So I remember sending you an email or something, just basically saying thanks and offering to tell people about your book, that kind of thing. And that's when we started looking at publishing together. And I had a look at our stats. There's that Kindle sharing thing on Amazon, so people can share the book around. And that combined with sales, I realized that over 8,000 different people have read my book since we started working together, which just blows my mind because I don't know 8,000 people, so they're definitely strangers, and they're from all over the world. And so, the difference from selling maybe 20 copies to having 8,000 plus people read my book, I mean, that kind of says it all. And not only that, in the process of working with you, I've learned some crucial tasks, some crucial skills for my business. I've learned how to do Facebook advertising. I've learned how to build an email list. I've learned to understand sort of copywriting and sort of self-promotion without being inauthentic. There's so many things that were offshoot learnings that I'm going to keep with me for the rest of my life, just from working with you. But most of all, and I think you said this earlier, I could focus on just doing my job. I could focus on what I do, which is writing and coaching, while I allow yourself and your team to be the experts in publishing.
That's great stuff. I mean, that's the first time I had heard about, the 8,000 people number. And it's funny, I don't know 8,000 people either, but, when I think about, yourself included, how many people from countries I've never even been to have discovered, read my book and taken action on it, and then actually wrote me and told me. I truly believe that the number of people that have actually written me and sent an email or got in touch and shared something versus the number of people that had some benefit to their life and, just never actually reached out and shared that with me as the author is probably at least 10x. Yeah. And, I think that's probably true for most people. And it may even be more than 10x. I mean, I think about the books that I've read that have made an impact on my life. And even as I'm saying this now, I'm realizing I should probably reach out and share with the author the impact that their book has had on me, because I know how valuable that's been to hear. And it's been one of the most, I guess, validating components of undertaking the whole process of writing a book and getting it out, that's something I never really thought about on the front end. As I was writing, as you mentioned as well, it was more of like this feeling of obligation. Like, I've got this knowledge, I've got this experience. People are asking me that I know, and why don't I just document it in a form that's easy enough to just give to people, or that somebody can buy for $10, $15 and get the summation of 10 years of experience in life. And so, I think there's something very valuable in what you're sharing. And I'm actually interested in hearing now how, having written the book, and after you did the second edition that we published and that I worked with you on, where you actually took that in terms of leveraging that book to build your business and brand, because you haven't mentioned it yet, but I know you run a large and growing coaching practice that focuses on confidence for men and life skills, and that's something that's growing even as we speak. So I'd love to hear, where and how the book played into that, and also just generally what you're up to on the shoulders of having written that book and gotten out to the world in a bigger way.
Yeah, well, the book's been there the entire journey. So it's what began it. I wrote before I coached, and I was still a full-time employee when I wrote the book and for quite some time after it. But what I started doing is, I remember there was somebody I'd asked for feedback. I'd asked them to give me feedback on the book. Oh no, actually I'm getting my timeline mixed up. So after I wrote the book, I basically used it as a kind of almost like a business card, because I realized I wanted to work with people one-to-one around the stuff that was in the book. I'd already done all this work that was kind of coaching. I'd been a probation officer and a manager and a team trainer and things like that. It was almost coaching. And I wanted to work with people who, weren't criminal offenders or stuff. People who just wanted help and, weren't going to yell at me half the time. And so I reached out. I think I made a post on Facebook or something and said, "Hi, I want to be a coach. Anyone keen for some free coaching so they can be my guinea pigs, And I started coaching two friends of mine, essentially. And I coached them using the book. We were basically going through the book one chapter at a time as coaching sessions. And so the book was right there from the beginning. It gave me the structure, and it was my sort of both my safety net and my workbook for coaching people. I would send them away and they would do the exercises in the book, and then we'd discuss those. And that was kind of the early form of my coaching. And then as time went on, I started to notice that some people were actually reading the book before I met them. It was either being recommended by friends, especially after you and I worked together to publish it. I started to get emails from people who had read the book, and I started to get people subscribed to my email list starting with the book. And then from there, it's funny because I'm not actually even sure how many of my clients started with the book, because they don't remember what they first heard of. They don't remember how they first got in touch, but many of them.
You said you don't even remember where you found my book, but
yeah,
ultimately, does it even matter, right? It's like, I think that's it. Hopefully, for people watching, it doesn't actually matter, and people may not even remember how or where they discovered your book, but they do remember and they do appreciate the resulting relationship and the actions that they've taken. And so I think that sort of speaks to the benefit of spending enough time and energy just getting it out to a wider and larger audience. But go ahead with what you were saying there, Dan.
Well, the book ended up playing a key role in some unexpected ways. The first one is in qualification. Now, if you're a coach, one of the absolute frustrations is spending time coaching the wrong people. It's something that ends up becoming a big cost to the business. You're trying to coach someone who isn't right for you, or you're not right for them, or they're not ready or something. And it takes you hours and hours of coaching before you finally realize this, at least before you get good at spotting it, And it becomes a real serious issue. You're wasting time, they're wasting time. The book, however, if someone read my book and then got in touch with me and said this was awesome, they were always really high quality clients, without exception. Anyone who's read my book and enjoyed it thoroughly and felt compelled to reach out to me has ended up being a fantastic client to work with, because they couldn't get through the book unless they were good client material. They were ready for coaching, they're easy to make massive changes with, and so on. So it had a massive impact in that sense. And I've also been able to use it as a resource for clients and for the men's community, Brojo, which I run. And so it becomes this kind of training tool that I can give to people, which complements all the other work that I do with them. And also, because now that I'm running a community, if they're all reading the book, they start to work in tandem. They have a common methodology for approaching goals and stuff. So as a community, they can talk together in the same language. They're doing the similar stuff. It really bonds them as a community. So I really never foresaw that happening when I wrote the book, that's how it would help me the most. It's not just about, promoting my work and bringing in potential new clients. It actually helped me to really effectively identify who I should be working with, and it helped me to bring a community closer together through having it sounds like the Bible now. It's actually sounding a little cultish, but it gave them a platform where they can speak the same language and work together on similar things. And so, yeah, I've found it.
I feel like we should link to that article where, since you made a biblical reference of you with the halo behind your head, the guru of the Brojo for New Zealand.
Well, it's not. Look, one of the things with people getting coaching and stuff is they want to know that they're investing their money wisely. Coaching scares a lot of people. They don't know what they're getting themselves into. It's a relatively new field. I mean, if you go to the dentist, you're probably going to get legitimate dental care. You don't really worry that it's a bad investment. But with coaching, you have no idea. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. Having a published book, especially one that was on the bestseller charts, it gives people a bit of peace of mind that you're not a shyster, that you're not some scam that's going to drain their money and decrease the value of their life. And they've got essentially something where they can start with. There are people who first made contact with me 2 years ago but didn't start coaching until recently because they weren't ready yet. But the book became something that helped them get ready. So I actually use the book as a gift quite often. Somebody I think, wow, we could be great to work together one day. Not yet. You're not ready yet. But here's something to help you get prepared. And they can start using the book,
Yeah. No, that's been my experience too. And, before I moved into publishing, I had a whole 18 months to 2 years of using Lifestyle Entrepreneur to transition into, I had a weekend-long training program called Business in a Weekend, and I had at any given time 2 to 3 one-on-one clients that were paying $2,000 to $3,000 a month, and I was literally doing weekly 90-minute calls, taking them through a lot of what I wrote in the book, but actually making it specific to them. And so, for everybody watching, and I think Dan's reflecting this as well, a book is something that at $15, $20 doesn't have a very high price point, but the value is exponentially larger. And the value in relation to somebody reading it and then becoming a client is, you just saved yourself 5 hours of talking to them because they've now read your book and become familiar with your thought process, your approach, your methodology. And that ends up becoming a fantastic thing for qualification, as Dan mentioned. I mean, just like with Dan and with many other people that have read my book and then reached out, it's not even a sales conversation at that point. It's somebody who is self-selected and said, I really like your thoughts. I like your approach to this topic, this subject, and I'm very clear that I want to work with you. And so if you're watching this and you're a coach or you're in a training or a sales-oriented business, how nice would it be if somebody gets in touch with you and it already knows that you're the person that they want to work with? And I actually think that that's one of the biggest values in writing a book that doesn't always get talked about, is the fact that, quite simply, somebody can become familiar with your approach and methodology and self-select into wanting to take further steps with you. That, of course, at a $15 book, and if you're published, you're going to get a percentage of that, versus a $500, weekend-long training program client, or a $2,000 to $3,000 a month one-on-one client. Even one of those equates to the same amount you'd make from selling 1,000 books. And so, the whole theme of the Book, Business, and Brand Building Summit is to illustrate the earning potential that is enabled through your book, as well as to talk about all of the different tactical aspects of creating a book and using a book and marketing a book and distributing a book to a wide audience. But it's on top of that effort that you actually realize the true benefit, the true gains, the true value of having spent the time to write your book and get it out there in a bigger way. So Dan, why don't you start to take us across the finish line here with, at this point, a few years hence, looking back, what would you have done different, and or what would you recommend for people out there that are partway through the process of writing a book, or maybe are frustrated that they self-published their book and not much is happening, and also painting a picture of what's next for you in terms of the Brojo and your coaching work that has largely been enabled through the Legendary Life?
Yeah, there's one key point that we haven't really touched on. We're talking about writing a book for the sake of business and everything like that. But also, it's just awesome life accomplishment to publish a book. Like, to take your ideas that your lifetime created that nobody else could have, to put them into a book, which, as a form of communication, is as old as time itself. We've been communicating with the written word almost since the beginning of human existence. It's like being part of history to write a book. It really does feel that way. And I see, I know there's a lot of people be watching this who are in the either writing or thinking about writing, but blocked from finishing. They just can't get to the actual point where it's publishable, where it's going to be a real book. And they're missing out on that awesome sensation of being a published author, of actually being one of the millions over history who have finished a book and made it available to the rest of the human race, And it's just such a great feeling. It's kind of one of those bucket list type things. And I think when I look back, one of the main barriers that came from me that I think stops a lot of people from finishing a book is actually the fear of people reading it. It's kind of a fear of success type insecurity, where the reason they procrastinate and delay and drag out is because of the vulnerability that comes with writing. Especially nonfiction. When you're writing about yourself or your ideas, you're essentially starting a process that is going to end with other people judging those ideas, judging you. And that's the big leap of confidence that's required for any author, is to allow other people to see it. Now, what I'd recommend is actually writing the book, and this is what I wouldn't have done differently, because I did do this, but I think it's what a lot of people should do differently, is write the book with full permission to not publish it in order to get it finished. So write the book first and get it finished, and then you can bring it to someone like yourself, Jesse, a team of people who are going to give you that unbiased, helpful feedback, and you don't need to worry that it's going to be judgmental, or that you're going to be laughed at, or your reputation is going to be damaged, or whatever. You can take it to a group of people who know books and they know your industry, and they're going to tell you whether or not it's worth publishing. They're going to tell you what to do with that book and give you that sense of security. What I'd seriously recommend is don't bother with this whole self-publishing thing. Now, it's not often that I say advice like that, but it's because not like trying to publish your own book is like trying to teach yourself to drive a car. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into, and you don't even know where to start. And it can be done, but it's slow and painful. And when I look at actually my self-publishing process that I went through, it cost me more to do that than it did to work with you. And it was just kind of like a big waste of time and money that I didn't need to go through, And that would be my top. Like, if I don't believe in regret, but if there was the possibility of going back, I would have just jumped straight to working with yourself, with somebody who knows what they're doing, so that I can just focus on writing and coaching and doing what I actually want to be doing. So in terms of
just to put an underscore on that point, and I appreciate what you just said, but in addition to that, one of my great mentors, also the keynote presenter on the Book Business Brand Building Summit, Marisa Murgatroyd, likes to say that trial and error is the most expensive form of business investment. And I think you just illustrated that in your own way. It's like there's such a difference between writing a book and being the voice and the messenger for your message and using your ideas to help transform people's lives versus learning formatting and interior design and publishing minutiae and all these other things. It's a very different skill set. So I just am appreciating the fact that you went through the self-publishing process and then ultimately were like, why tear my hair out trying to figure all this stuff out myself when there are other people who specialize in this and do it all day long? I mean, you see behind me, I need to buy more of these little plastic hooks to hang up all the books that we publish now. And I love it, right? So why not work with somebody that loves that aspect of the process instead of splitting your focus between, being an exponent for your message and learning 20 new skill sets that really don't have much of a payoff and, quite frankly, would take a massive amount of time and energy to get to the point of somebody who does publishing all day long. So back to you.
Well, this actually speaks to a key overall type of mistake that many coaches or people in the service industry get into, is they try to do things themselves because they think it will save them money, but they don't stop to ask, do I actually want to be doing this thing? So for me, like, don't figure out how to publish a book unless you want to be a book publisher. If you just want to be a book author, then stay with being an author and pay the people who know what they're doing to do their job while you stay doing your job. The same when I first set up my own website. I spent so many hours, days, designing my own website before I asked myself, am I being a website designer or a coach? Because a coach doesn't design websites, so what am I doing right now?
And there's other people you can pay a couple $100 and they can bang it out in a couple days and it'll look 5 times better than the weeks or months of effort that you put in, right? And that's true in so many other fields.
Yeah. And I think, trying to learn how to self-publish, especially before you've even finished the book, it's just a procrastination technique. It's just your fear delaying the publication of the book, delaying actually getting it done. So if you really, you've got to invest in this. It's as simple as that. It's the same with anything else. You want to become, say, a coach as a business, then all the stuff that isn't coaching, pay someone else to do it. It will actually be a saving of money. I think about how many weeks, I spent like a whole day just trying to understand the Kindle contract on Amazon, and how it works online. That's a day I wasn't coaching. It's a day I wasn't reaching out to clients. It's a day I wasn't developing my own practice or learning. It was a wasted day. And so that was kind of everything in that category is where I would go back and change it, and it's where I try to change things now. I focus on doing what I'm supposed to be doing and letting the other experts do their thing,
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great sort of closing point that ties a lot of what we were talking about together. And it's something that I wrote about and I'm a big proponent of myself, which is, focus on strengthening your strengths instead of strengthening your weaknesses. And, when you focus on strengthening your strengths, then you get a competitive edge that is extremely valuable by specializing and identifying the things that really just you can do and becoming great at doing them. If you strengthen your weaknesses, then you're always rushing around and dabbling in a bunch of different areas, and that's not really to your benefit or to anybody else's, to be honest, because you're not going to get to a point that's at or exceeds the level of somebody that's focusing just on building their own strengths and delegating or getting support around the other areas and aspects of the business and in life in general. So I see you're nodding your head. If you want to add to that, go ahead, and then we'll start to bring this to a close.
Well, it's just more of the same, really. I mean, my business really started to turn around and actually have an impact on many lives when I stopped trying to fix my weaknesses and work on my strengths. And the way I see it, if you bring your weaknesses up, every second you're doing that, your strengths are coming down because they're not being maintained. So you end up average across the board. Your okay at stuff that you used to suck at, but now you're down to okay at stuff that you were great at because you neglected those areas. And so if I just spend 90% of my time focusing on creating clients, serving those clients as powerfully as possible, and then delegating, paying other people, whatever it needs to take to do the stuff that isn't directly involved with that, I've found in my experience, and this is a change I've made more recently, that things just start to grow the way that I wanted them to grow, and I'm not feeling like I'm wasting time.
Yeah, I guess my final point on that is, and really, I came into publishing through perhaps a unique approach. As an author, long before I ever even considered getting into publishing, I felt called to write my book, Lifestyle Entrepreneur, and I worked with two different traditional publishers, one in Southeast Asia and then in the US and the rest of the world. And it was through having those two reference experiences that I saw, how I could build a publishing company that I wish I had 2 years before. And it just took root. It was an idea that took hold of me. And now I truly feel like I found my career. I'll be doing this for years and decades to come. And therefore, as the years goes on, I'm going to continue strengthening my edge on publishing, book launch promotion, working with authors, and being an advocate and a resource to authors. And that compounds over time. So I've delegated almost everything else. I've find myself in a position where I have a scheduling assistant, I have other team support that lets me have 4 to 5 hours a day just focusing on talking to authors, working on book launches, finalizing design, setting up promotional strategies. And 4 to 5 hours a day, 20 some hours a week, 80 plus hours a month becomes thousands of hours over a course of a few years. That adds up pretty quick, right? Just focusing on one thing, on one specific area and aspect. And I encourage everybody, as Dan's saying, as I'm reinforcing, to identify as much as you can what that area of true strength that you want to focus on and that you're exceptionally good at, and then plow as much time and energy into that as you can. That's where you hire people and build a team and ultimately create jobs and grow a business, is by bringing in the support to let you focus on that to a greater degree. That's true as an author, as well as an entrepreneur, a business owner, a coach, and anything else that can grow out of the act of having a book and getting it out there. So, Dan, you want to take us across the finish line here with some closing words of inspiration, and then we're going to shut this down.
I think the key points that I wanted to make is, if you can just for a second understand that the reason that writing a book will help you build a business and build a brand is because writing a book is just this very powerful way to have an impact. I was reading the other day, I was reading Letters from a Stoic. I was like, this information is thousands of years old and it's still helping. It's still helping people. And I think a book, more than anything else, is the only way to really leave your mark in history, to become part of the human story that goes on long after you're dead. I mean, it sounds a bit melodramatic, I guess, but it's giving birth to something when you write a book. It's like a child that lives on after you die, and it keeps helping people after that. And that's why I'm so excited to write my next book with you as well. And now I can keep adding to that. So now it's like a family, this information that I've accumulated in my lifetime that I know will help other people. I don't know when I'm going to die. It could happen at any point. So if I can get it into a book as quickly as possible, then it will live on despite whatever happens to me, and my life will therefore always have that meaning. I learned something in order to pass it on to others. So for anyone who's allowing fear and hesitation and self-sabotage and cowardice to hold them back from writing and publishing a book, just stop and think of how much the world's missing out. How much other people could have a better life because of what you've got to share. And every day that you delay sharing that with them is a day that they miss out. So that's what gets me through the tough times of writing, is knowing that if I don't finish this, somebody's missing out.
That's beautiful. And I'm glad that you touched on Letters from a Stoic. You know, one of my favorite books is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, former emperor of the Roman Empire and the sort of original philosopher king. And, you know, that book was written almost 2,000 years ago. And here it is, you know, it somehow made it through the centuries, and is just as impactful now as it was, I imagine, then. And, you know, between what Dan's saying and what I'm saying in regards to the longevity of a book, don't let that psych you out in the sense that you're not, you know, you don't need to think about creating something that's going to stand the test of time for centuries and millennia. But actually, that's the potential power of a book, is something that once you get it into a fixed form and you cross that threshold of saying, okay, I'm done writing and now I'm into getting this into as many hands as possible, it takes on a life of its own that you can't predict, but that can put you in touch with people like Dan and my relationship. And there's many other stories as well that you'll hear over the course of this summit with people that, you know, ultimately became in touch with me, and that I developed a relationship that was preceded by writing that book and getting it out there and pushing through the fears and hesitations that are intrinsic in that process. I can tell you from the view from the other side is it's all worth it. So Dan, I thank you for coming on and for sharing your insight and wisdom. I appreciate you. And I appreciate all of you watching this and participating in the Book, Business, and Brand Building Summit. Of course, this is just one of many interviews and videos. And, you know, we're going to bring the heat on every single one. So thanks, and we'll see you on a future interview. And Dan, take us home.
Well, thank you, man. I really appreciate having the chance to talk about this. And, you know, if this conversation inspires even one person to complete their book, then I'm stoked, because I know for them personally, even if no one else reads it, it's such a great thing to finish a book, to get your ideas on paper, to understand yourself better through that process. Even if no one reads a book, it's still worth writing it. So to know that they can do that and then, you know, be able to publish it and experience, like I have, those connections that come from sharing your knowledge through a book, and then of course working with someone like yourself so actually people get to read it. Yeah, it's pretty exciting to think that somebody's watching this right now and they're at the beginning of the process that I once started, and they have no idea how good it gets. So that's awesome.
Wonderful. All right, we will see you on the next interview. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Take care.